Welcome to the first of our 3 stage 4 movement classes. This one is all about the neck, the rib cage and the shoulders, so here up. And we're going to be looking at how these things are meant to move, what you should be doing, etc, to get you back to where you need to be. So what you can also look at here is the PDF that's associated with this class, which will have hyperlink shortcuts to the specific exercises that I'm going to talk about so that you can look at them and practice them in a separate way to really master the movement of the neck, rib cage and shoulders. You can also then look within the regional rehabilitation sections at the mobility videos for the neck, the mid-back and the shoulders as separate follow-along videos. But this is really to try and integrate all that content together so that it kind of all makes sense. Okay, so when it comes to movement, it's not just about do you have flexibility. What we're more interested in at this point is how do these movements relate to how we are designed to move, which is mostly related to our gait referring to our walk, okay? And so there are predetermined pairings of movement that is meant to happen. For example, as I step forwards and I put weight through my front leg here, my pelvis is going to drop one side, my rib cage should drop this way, and my head should go that way. At this point, this arm is rotating coming forwards and the other arm is rotating coming backwards. Now, it doesn't make sense if my head is over there, and my brain recognizes this. And so there are 4 big gait-related movements that you'll see in the PDF, and these are called shift, suspension, strike, and transition. And this is taken from the amazing work of Gary Ward and Anatomy in Motion, which many of you are familiar with and we are trained in. And so we're going to utilize these movements that really exaggerate the position of gait that we are in and break it down into sections so that we can understand what's the neck meant to be doing at this point, what's the mid-back meant to be doing at this point, etc. So the first thing that we're going to practice is disassociating the neck from the mid-back. As one does one thing, the other shouldn't do the same. It should do the opposite at all times, like a jam jar type motion, okay? So with the neck, for example, as my neck turns to the left, my rib cage should rotate to the right, okay? Because as we just described in movement, if my pelvis goes one way, my rib cage goes the other, my neck goes the other, okay? And there are lots of ways that we can practice this, but to begin with, you can just be rotating the head left and right, okay? Right, okay, I understand that. Then you're going to keep the head still, and instead you're going to rotate the shoulders. So now the thorax meaning rib cage, that area is now moving instead. Once you've got that, then we want to try to do the 2 at the same time, which means essentially as my shoulders turn this way, all I'm doing is I'm bringing my head towards it, essentially. So I'm rotating this way, and I'm rotating that way. So just start nice and relaxed. We almost want swinging of the arms, turning of the head. Swinging of the arms, turning of the head. Keep going with this for now. Good, so that's rotation. And we can just practice along with that. What I would suggest is at any point in this video, pause it, practice a little bit more, continue the video and move on to the next little sequence or little things that we're going to show you, okay? Next thing we're going to look at now is the disassociation in the next plane of motion. And then eventually we add them all together, okay? So these movements are called cogs. You can get the full cogs again in the PDF, but I'm breaking it down bit by bit for you. This time what we're going to do is we're going to be dropping the head, first of all, left and right. Okay, so just let the head drop one way and then the other. And then what we're going to do is we're going to then practice rib cage motion, okay, not spine motion. Now people get really confused with this, but watch the difference. Okay, this is my spine bending. You can see my head goes out of shot because I've got to move in a really big way. I'm bending from the whole spine versus my rib cage. You can see how here is moving, but I'm not going out of line. So my head is still in line, but my shoulders are moving. If I'm to move my spine, my whole body has to move. So use a mirror and start to learn the difference between bending left and right. This is your spine. And shifting using your rib cage. Okay. At this point, the head relatively stays still, but we can exaggerate it. So as I drop this way, I'm going to pull my head that way a bit. Okay. And as I drop this way a little bit, and this way a little bit. So back and forth. Let's just practice this. Remember, it's rib cage, not spine. So that covers side-to-side motion. And again, pause, use a mirror, practice, get that sense. Remember, these movements are not about sets and reps. It's about understanding, it's about feeling and reconnecting with how your body's meant to move, okay? And then we want to look at, first of all, the difference between neck movement and skull movement, because they're actually two different things. The joints, the two top joints at the top are more related to skull, which is chin tucking. And the rest of the joints are, again, much grosser movements. So you're just going to practice the difference between chin in, chin out. At this point, imagine this was my neck. My head is like a bowling ball on top and it's rotating, but the neck is relatively fixed. Chin in, chin out. So just practice that and then get the feeling or the sense of the difference to dropping the head down and dropping the whole head back. And then start to move from one to the other. Chin, neck. Chin, neck. Because remember, we have to update the map in the brain of the body to improve what's known as our proprioception, which is inversely related to decreasing pain. So the better proprioception you have, the less likely you are to experience pain. So it's important to understand how your body moves. Okay, then we want to link in what the rib cage is doing at this point. Okay, so now what happens as we move is as the neck extends or the chin comes out, these two are paired together, okay, we have a tilting of the rib cage where think of it like a slumping, or these two bones coming together, or if I was hit here, winded, rounded, okay? So we can go from neutral, slump and chin out, and back. Slump and chin out, and back. Really let yourself relax, okay? Then we have to think, well, what do the shoulders do at this position in movement? And what they do is they turn in. So we can add that element in also. So what we're going to do, you see better from here, is we slump, we turn in, and the chin comes out all at the same time. Yeah, and then the opposite is also true. So as we turn out, chest out, you can see how I go from slump to there and chin in. So that position to neutral, that position to neutral. And it takes a little bit of a coordination and understanding, but we're going to now try and move from one to the other. So we go roll in, slump, chin out, turn the shoulders the other way as the chest opens and the chin comes in. And then we go the other way. And this is the same movement that you're going to be doing in the low back class. But for now, we're just thinking about what the neck and the mid back are doing, and we'll worry about the rest later. So it's a really important spinal mechanical movement to master, is this pairing of motion. Because very often what you'll find is that people always want to do things the same way, not oppose. And it's this opposition of movement that allows for efficiency in movement. When it comes to the neck, the other thing that we really have to talk about here are the neck reflexes. And there are two reflexes in particular. One is called the vestibular ocular reflex, and the other is our vestibular ocular reflex cancellation. Now, vestibular ocular reflex, or VOR for short, is very simple. It's can my eyes stay fixed on a target, if I'm looking at the camera now, whilst my body is moving or my head is turning. So if I'm walking through the supermarket and I want to look at the price as I'm walking past, I need to use my VOR to do so. And many people struggle to link this. So it's a really nice thing to just practice. So what you can do is put your thumb in front, arm's length in front, okay, there. Turn the head to 45 degrees each side, and you'll see how my eyes stay on my thumb. So start slow, and slowly you want to get quicker. We can do left and right, and we can also do up and down. And it's learning to integrate your balance system with your visual system, with your neck system. Because if the balance system isn't quite right, the neck will tighten up to compensate. And so this is an exercise that we may prescribe you specifically anyway in the clinic, but certainly within this class, I'd like you all to practice it. And if you find it particularly difficult, then it's one to go away and practice, in which case you would do multiple sets per day, 5 to 10 sets per day of around 5 to 10 seconds, not a lot. So little dead times in the day, waiting for the kettle to boil, got a break in work, meeting, you're on a video, you're on a voice call, but video's off and you can be there doing your VOR, okay? Then on to the cancellation. This is really simple. This time we have the thumb fixed and we turn, in this case 90 degrees in one direction, and we follow the thumb with it. We pause, we go again, and at all times I'm fixing on my thumb. So even though the world is moving around me, I'm fixed on the target. And so this is another really important balance reflex that we have to use really well if our neck is going to stay relaxed and kind of pain-free. And so we just want to try to do that one full circle. Again, if you find it difficult, any dizziness, lightheadedness, then speak to us first, because we don't want to be prescribing something if we haven't talked to you about it. But if it's just, it's hard to do, but it's doable, practice. Otherwise, if you're unsure, speak to us. But the same rules would apply, 5 to 10 sets per day, and you might just do one turn. Okay, so this is the VOR and the VOR cancellation, really important reflexes for your neck issues, and really one of the first things we need to kind of get to grips with for this class. The next thing to talk about is the rib cage. Very, very often neglected when it comes to movement. And many people struggle to understand, first of all, how to move it. So the first thing we're going to look at, which is similar to what you did in your assessment, is the movements of the rib cage. So we've done some already. We've looked at this ability to move sideways and sideways. We've looked at rotation of the mid-back. But now what we want to do is we want to make sure that we disassociate from the pelvis at this point, really important. So for example, I could turn my thorax, but my hips are also moving at the same time. My whole body's turning. Well, that's no good. We saw already that the head stays fixed and that happens. But what really should happen at this point is, even though my thorax is going this way, my pelvis should be going the other way. This bit should be driving forwards. Okay, so essentially all you're going to do is keep the hips fixed. These aren't going to move. Feel the bony bits. But you're going to rotate the rib cage. And you won't be able to go anywhere near as far as if you let your hips go with it. But it's not about how far you could go. It's about being able to do it. So keeping the hips still, keeping the head still, and just from the shoulder, you can't go anywhere near as far. And you feel a lot of tension in the back because those joints are going to lock up a lot quicker. Arms relaxed, just turning the mid-back, learning what that feels like without needing to use the pelvis, okay? The same can be true when we're doing this motion, the side-to-side motion. So the head stays still. And for this one, we don't have to worry too much about the pelvis just yet. We're going to add that in the next class. And for the tilting, this is a really common problem that lots of people struggle with, whereby either they have flared ribs at the front. So if you lie on your back and you look at your ribs here, do they stay flared open and expanded with a really flat middle part of your back, or you're here all the time? Now, posture in and of itself, there's no good or bad posture, there's just inability to change your posture. And so if you're stuck here all the time, this is no good. Equally, if I'm stuck here all the time, this is no good. So we need to start to experience what it feels like to move through these positions, okay? And so this is why in the PDF attached, there's a series of exercises to learn how to master expansion of the rib cage. Because what most people struggle to do is when they breathe, because we have to always associate the rib cage with the breathing, naturally, because the lungs sit within the rib cage, that people are quite good at taking a breath in, but we don't really take a full exhale. And if we don't take a full exhale, what that means is these ribs will stay flared open. It's when you exhale that the ribs drop down, they come back in, and around, okay? And it's that exhale that's associated with that position. So what you can start to do is go back to what we were doing before, but integrating the breathing. So what that means is we take an in breath with expansion at the front and an out breath with expansion at the back. But what you're focusing on is letting the ribs drop down and in. So it's a very long exhale where you're thinking about almost crushing the lungs to get everything out of them, all of the air out, and then suddenly a breath in afterwards. Okay, so let's just do one more where we take a nice breath in Long exhale. Sink the ribs, let the chin go forward, sink the rib cage. You'll feel the abdominals working hard at that point. And so go through the series of exercises in the associated PDF, which is the supine breathing and the sideline breathing, to really master this thorax expansion. So again, another nice natural pause point here for you to now go away and practice those things. And you'll find those same exercises throughout our process in the mobility series and even in some of the stage 5 strengthening series, because they're so important to get to master. So go through them and make sure that your rib cage can open there, but equally close down, because if it can't, you may find chronically tight middle back muscles where you're simply not able to expand the rib cage. Okay? Which takes us on to what the shoulders need to do at the same time. So if you're struggling to drop the ribs down and in, what that associates with is the shoulder blade coming around. Okay, so we're just going to look a little bit now at the shoulders and what they are supposed to do. So when we're looking at the shoulders, they have to integrate into what the rib cage is doing as they hang off the body, and they need to be able to swing freely. Okay, so one of the first things is making sure that we can get a nice big shoulder circle. Okay, and in the shoulder mobility series within the PDF, you're going to go through and practice this shoulder circle movement. So essentially all we're going to do is we're going to come up in front, and we're going to try and get the shoulder to brush the ear. And this is where then you'll struggle, because what you want to do is drop the arm out and back round. The key is to try and keep it within that line as best as possible without turning too much through the rest of your body. And so that's the simplest but most effective way to start to get better movement in it in isolation. But again, this series is about linking things together, okay? And so we've already seen some of this because we've started using what the shoulders are meant to do in that line. But what we can further do is look at that in different positions. Okay, so now what we can do is we can put one leg in front of the other, and we can think about moving in how we're designed to walk. So as that knee bends ever so slightly, the opposite arm rotates to palm up, and the opposite one goes palm down. Okay, so we've got to think rhythmically. We've got to think as the front knee bends, rotate, palm up, and my opposite hand, my mistake, palm down. Okay, here. So we're getting now rotation through the shoulders, but with the whole body doing what it should do. Okay, in the low back class, you'll notice that my hip is drifting out to the side here. So you can start to look at that and make sure you're doing that now at the same time. And then we can switch sides and we can try to do the other way. Yeah, think about holding a plate here and down. Okay, so we can look at it front to back, and we can also look side on, where we're rotating and we're pairing the rib cage. So remember, as they rotate in, we're rounding, and as they rotate back and out, we're expanding. But what I really want you to focus on here is how movement occurs up the arm, bit by bit by bit. So if my arm is out to the side here, okay, and I start turning it in, what happens with the arm? Really try to feel your arm. What happens? If I turn, the first thing to turn is my hand, there, with a little bit of movement up to here. As I do more, I now feel tension in my elbow. As I do more, now I feel tension in my shoulder. And if I do even more, I feel it in my shoulder blade. And so the movement occurs bit by bit by bit, joint by joint by joint, until eventually the rib cage happens. But it's really important that you start to feel this and connect with it for the proprioception. So that's the exercise. Feel the hand move up to the elbow, feel that tension to the shoulder and the shoulder blade. Then unwind from the shoulder, feel it down to the elbow and then to the wrist. Or from that position, try to unwind from the hand first. Pull the fingers, feel the tension come up to the elbow, into the shoulder and back around the other way. And so you can start to practice that feeling until once you've mastered that, you're going to do opposing motions on opposite sides at the same time. So as one goes one way, the other goes the other. And this is the arm spiral movement, which you can find a separate video on explaining that in more detail within the PDF section. So that's the shoulders, that's what we want them doing. They need to be free flowing, okay? They need to be rotating well, and eventually we want lots of nice big mobility through the shoulders. And then finally, we're going to look at our 3 out of 4 of our big gait related movements, the suspension, the shift, and the transition, and look at what the neck, the rib cage, and the shoulders are meant to do within these movements. So first of all, we're going to look at suspension, okay? For the whole suspension explanation, you can see the PDF, but we're just looking at neck, shoulders, and rib cage for now. So suspension is the time in movement when you're most loading through the foot, the arch is flattening, and it's like it's the middle stance position, okay? So essentially, it's this bit. You're fully loaded on that leg. It's like that bit of movement before you go off to go the other way. So to practice this, we're going to have one foot in front of the other, back knee straight, heel raised. You'll be doing this a lot, okay? From here, what happens is that front knee bends and the weight moves into the front leg. That's really important. We have to put the weight forwards. So if you look at how I'm moving here, my whole body is moving. What I don't want is the knee bending like this, but my body's not moving. I want the whole thing rocking forward and back. So you can do this to begin with. Just bend the front knee and back. Just get really comfy, balanced, find the right foot position for you and find that position. Then what we want to think about, okay, first of all, let's look at the neck. What's the neck meant to do? Well, frankly, at this point, is still, okay? So as I move forwards, what will happen is the hip will drift off to the side, okay? And now what I want with the rib cage, this is where people struggle, because what happens is we tell you, take the hips off one side and your body drops away. What I want you to think about is that rib cage, like you were doing earlier, dropping back to the middle. So now it looks like I'm straight, but naturally what I want to do is this, okay? Because my hips have gone over that way. So let your hips go off, but think about that rib cage sitting in. You'll feel this bit scrunched together. It feels really, really tight, but that's the correct position to be in. We could even think about raising this arm up, because now that rib cage is coming in, it's dropping in. So it's all we're doing is knee bends, hip goes out, and you drop in, okay? That's all I want you to think about, okay? That's one movement. If my front knee is bending, my pelvis is turning, but hopefully you've spotted the error in what I'm doing, because you'll see how I'm moving all at once. And as I talked about, there needs to be opposition. So as the front knee bends and my pelvis drifts around, we must stay facing forwards, but equally, as we've just seen, dropping in. Okay, so it becomes, pelvis is now going there, I'm still here, and I'm dropped in, okay? What you can do to make that a bit easier to do is take the front leg arm, palm up, and just turn it backwards as that front knee bends, and just practice that. So we can break it down and practice different elements. I can practice the rotational element of my pelvis goes one way, my thorax goes the other. Because as my front knee bends, my pelvis is doing it anyway, and now my thorax is doing the opposite. Or I could practice this side bending motion. As my hip goes out, my thorax drops in. My hip goes out, I don't fall away, I bring it back in. So we can practice these different elements within that same movement pattern, okay? And then finally, we want to know what do we do in the front or back motion. Because remember, there's always 6 options: front and back, side to side, rotate, rotate. So what does the thorax do in rotation? In front to back. So with that front knee bending, what happens is we go out to the side, and what should be happening at this point is the chest should be out. So it should be, as the knee bends, it's like a bow and arrow. I'm being pulled forwards. So we can go from slump to pull, slump to pull. So you can see how what we're actually trying to do is integrate the whole system together as one thing. So front knee bends, chest comes out in front, slump, and chest out in front. When we walk, there are many positions that we have to take, and so the previous exercise was looking at the position whereby the foot is most loaded, and so this is when, as the foot hits the ground, and you kind of load into it. But we also want to look at the journey to get there. So this is more about, in walking, that shift of weight bearing from the rear leg towards the front leg. So in the previous video, as far as the rib cage was going, we were talking about dropping it back in. Whereas now we're going to practice the opposite thing. So many features stay the same. In terms of the feet, we're going to have that front knee bending, just gently back and forth, okay? And as before, the weight's going from the back leg towards the front leg. But this time, we're going to let the rib cage drop away. Okay, so we're actually going to just kind of go with that comfort. Imagine this backhand just hanging down. So we can just get used to that hanging down. Now, what you'll see now with the head is, remember, things have to jam jar or oppose each other, is my head is staying level. I'm not dropped over here. So even though my rib cage is going off to one side, or my shoulders are dropped here, I'm trying to keep my head as level as possible. So you're getting some relative stretching through this area. So we just want to groove that movement. Shoulder drops, head stays level. To encourage that, we could raise the front arm up. And you can see how this is a similar thing. Front arm up. And so that's what we're looking at in a sideways motion. The front to back motion in this is exactly the same, it's the opposite as to before. Before, I was asking you to do was chest out, chin in. So we were going here. Remember, the arms open up, chest out, chin in. In this movement, now instead of practicing the sideways motion, we're going to look at the front to back. So in this one, we're going to slump. We're going to slump and chin out. So remember this motion from before, slumping and chin out. So as we shift the weight towards the front leg, now instead of being chest out, we're actually going to start from that position. It's easier to start from there, and then look at now adding these elements together. So from a slumped position, we can also keep the head level. So we're slumped and we're chin out, and now we're through there. Okay. Then we can also add in the rotational element. So we've already talked about how the pelvis goes one way, the shoulders go the other, the head goes the other, okay? So if my head has to say neutral, what I can encourage is my rib cage to turn that way, because remember, pelvis is going with the leg, so ribs have to go the opposite way. So the easiest thing to do here is reach forwards. So that means we can have this arm up and this arm related to your back leg moving forwards, okay? So we're trying with a gentle slumped position, front arm high, opposite arm going forwards, head level. A lot of factors to combine together here at this point, but that's what this is about. This is about integrating the joints in 3D, not just front, back, side to side, or rotate, everything at once. So it takes a lot of practice and it takes a lot of thought to actually integrate these joints. So we're going to go through slowly. Front leg bends. Okay, pelvis will come off to the side, but that's for the next class. Don't worry too much about that for now. What I want you to think about is at this point, the rib cage dropping away. Okay, rib cage drops away, head stays level. That's side to side. I've got some degree of slump, some degree of chin tuck. I could add the arm if I wish, but what I could focus on instead is just reaching forwards. And then the key is to go from that position, okay, froze in time here, back to neutral, and back there again. Because this is a reminder to your nervous system. It's not about doing 3 sets of 8. It's about teaching your brain or reminding your brain, these are how these joints are meant to work together as a team, because you might have forgotten, essentially. And so by showing the nervous system the correct kind of like tick box, tick box, tick box, tick box, it's an aha moment. It recognizes this is the position of most efficiency, the least resistance, the most ease. And now that you've shown me that, I'm happy to keep you there. And so just a small amount of practice, doing 1 or 2 repetitions perfectly is better than rushing. I've never shown anybody this movement and they've done it at the correct speed. Always have to say slow down. So slow down. Super, super slow. Off to the side with the hips. Drop away. Head stays level. Slump. Chin out. Reach in, arm, knee bends. That's the end position. Back to neutral. So if I show you in full time. So this is your shift pattern. You can get the video for the whole exercise in the PDF attached. So the first exercise we did was your suspension. So let's just remind ourselves of that one to compare now that we have 2 differences. With suspension, instead of dropping away, we're going towards. Again, head stays level. And this time I'm reaching into it. And this time I'm taking the arm behind me. Yeah, here. My thorax is still doing the same thing. It's either rotating that way or this way. It's the same thing. I just have to do it with a different arm. I'm either with suspension going into it, or with shift, I'm going away from it. Don't worry too much if this is hard to understand. It is hard to understand, but if you can master these movements, the chances of you injuring yourself are a lot lower. Because in order to do these movements, you have to have a high amount of awareness of your body. You have to have good proprioception. And we know that the more proprioception you have, the less likely you are to experience pain, because your brain understands your body. The map of the brain, the map of the body within the brain, known as the sensory homunculus, is up to date. It's like Google Maps is updated. We're all good. We know where to go. The brain is in a black box. It doesn't understand where your body is. So we have to move it so that it understands where you are. So that concludes this first class, the upper body, limb, shoulders, rib cage class. There is a third movement relating to the gait, but we're going to save that for the pelvic class, where we go through the strike motion. So we had suspension, we had shift today, and next time we're going to go through strike, and in the foot class we're going to go through the final one, which is known as transition. So these words refer to the phases of gait, of walking. We suspend, we shift, we strike the ground, we shift our weight, we suspend our weight, we transition through our weight. That's where they come from. And so we want to master each of these phases of the step, because what's incredible is that one step takes 0.6 seconds, and every single muscle in your body will turn on and turn off, and every joint will move in every direction. And what we're asking you to do with these movements is put all that together in a cognitively conscious way. And so you're starting to recognize actually how difficult it is to walk, how amazing it is that kids just learn it by copying. It's quite crazy. And for people who've had a stroke and have to relearn how to walk, it's very, 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 very difficult. Just like a robot struggles to move with any degree of fluidity in comparison to the human body. And so that's why it's important to try as best as we can to understand how our body moves and get as good as we can at it. So I hope you enjoyed this class, and we'll move on to the spinal one.